What's going on, friends? So why on earth would Harley-Davidson get away from a gear-driven cam design in favor of a chain-driven cam design when the gear-driven cams were so reliable on the Evo for all those years? Well, today we're going to take a look at that and see if we can't get a little insight into answering that question. So the mention of cam and chain in the same sentence can really touch a few nerves when it's regarding a Harley-Davidson. As we all know, there had been numerous failures with the twin cam 88s, and even today there are still failures sometimes with the later model twin cams if you run those hydraulic tensioners too long. But for years, from 1984 to 1999, the whole span of the Evo, it had a gear-driven cam, and it was never an issue. So Harley-Davidson going and changing it seems a little bit ludicrous. The Sportster still runs the gear-driven cams today, so why doesn't the big twin still run those gear-driven cams? But before we get into all that, be sure to give the video a like if you enjoy it, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. To us, it would have made more sense to just keep the gear-driven cam design that the Evo used when they came out with the twin cam instead of going with the chain-driven cams. It was reliable, and there was never any issue with it, but when we're talking about the twin cam engine, this was the late 90s when this engine came out, and Harley-Davidson had a problem with noise. So the EPA doesn't just hate emissions, they also hate noise. So Harley-Davidson really had to find a way to try to keep the noise, the overall noise the motorcycle made, mechanical and the exhaust noise, down to a minimum. And also, knowing Harley-Davidson, the chains were probably a lot more cost-effective and cost-efficient for the company to manufacture versus the gears, which we'll get into that here in a minute. Now, speaking of cost savings, this is purely speculation on my part. I was not a fly on the wall at Harley-Davidson when they designed the twin cam engine, but Harley-Davidson on the 88, they switched to a pressed crank assembly. Now, this isn't a huge deal, and it wasn't a big deal on the 88 because they had the Timken bottom end with the tapered roller bearings. And in 2003, that's when they went to a little cost-saving measure, did away with the Timkens, started using basically a roller bearing, a heavy roller bearing, and they pressed in the left side crankcase. This saved Tyven money on assembly costs. Everybody's happy. Now, one potential issue with a gear drive is that on the twin cam, the runout has to be 2 thousandths or less to keep a good alignment on the gears, a good mesh. With the pressed crank assembly, what had happened is the engine got larger, they started putting more power and torque into it, it would start to spin and walk and create more runout on the pinion shaft. And the pinion shaft is where your gear drives are at. So maybe Harley-Davidson knew that long-term down the road, as these engines wore, as they got bigger, that gear mesh was going to come out. Those gears weren't going to mesh as well. It was going to get louder, and then they were going to have potential engine failures. But also in my mind, if Harley-Davidson knew that and they saw that issue coming with the crankshaft, why didn't they weld it? And also, you would think as much time and effort and money was spent on developing the twin cam 88 that they also would have basically caught that spring tensioner issue, which caused the shoes to come apart, run through the oil system, and destroy the entire engine. So for Harley-Davidson to actually manufacture gear drives and install them on the twin cam, they would basically have to do what they do on the Sportster. Now on the Sportster, they have several different gear sets. And what they do on the Sportster is every Sportster case is test fitted with these different sets of gears. And what they're checking for is the best fitment, the best gear mesh. Because the better the gears mesh, the less noise they're going to produce. Now, with having an engine that's been around as long as the Sportster had, it kind of made sense because it was already there, it's already in place. But when we talk about doing this with going to the twin cam, that could get a little pricey as a company for having to take time to test fit these gears into this new big twin engine and then try to find the set that matches and then test it, make it all work. And once again, we kind of come back to it was probably more cost effective for the company as a whole. So basically what it boils down to is if you've ever heard a stock Sportster idling, The gear noise, you really don't hear any gear noise in there. Yeah, I know the exhaust and everything, but if you really listen to it, you really don't hear a lot of gear noise. But if you put a set of aftermarket cams into a Sportster with all that gear-driven cams running together, you'll notice a big difference. It's actually pretty loud. And that is exactly what Harley-Davidson was having to avoid. They had to get the noise out of these engines. Now, I personally love gear-driven cams, and if you're able to install a set on a twin cam motorcycle, it is one of the absolute best upgrades you could possibly do on any twin cam, is to get rid of the cam chain tensioners, go ahead and get you a set of gear-driven cams in there. Now with gear-driven cams, you get more accurate and reliable timing, and you also don't have to worry about the tensioner shoes. Even the hydraulic tensioner shoes wear out eventually. Not as fast as the old spring-style tensioners from the 88. Those technically were supposed to last about 30,000 miles, and for some unfortunate people, they only got about 15 and shelled a motor. Now the hydraulic tensioners, they're supposed to run up to about 50,000 miles. But in either case, I would highly recommend checking them at 30,000 miles. Now there are some people out there that say you could just completely remove the tensioners right out of the motor on those twin cams and just run the chains without tensioners. Now I have some friends that have done it. They have no problem with it. It's a little bit louder. It's a little bit louder than normal. I don't know if I would ever try that myself, but the guys that I've talked to that have taken their tensioners out and are just running it without the tensioners, they swear by it. I mean, and if you think about it, small block Chevrolets, a lot of V8 engines out there ran for years without tensioners on their cam chains. It does create more noise, and I'm not an engineer, but I think it's kind of fair to say that that's probably why Harley-Davidson went with the tensioners on the twin cam. Now, as I mentioned, the EPA doesn't just hate emissions, they also hate noise. And part of what Harley-Davidson's been up against is also reducing the mechanical noise from their motorcycles in an attempt to try to give the customer a little bit more exhaust note, and also with their Screamin' Eagle line, trying to get a little bit more sound out of their Screamin' Eagle exhaust and still meet the EPA requirements with them being an OEM. When the Milwaukee 8 came out, a lot of us heard of it. It had a single cam design that was very reminiscent of the Evo. And I, like a lot of other people, got pretty excited hearing about that, hoping, just really hoping, that it was going to be a gear-driven design. But a lot of us were disappointed to learn that even though it was the single cam design, it was going to be driven by chains. So with the EPA's requirements becoming even more strict, Harley-Davidson had to engineer even more ways into the Milwaukee 8 to try to reduce the noise. So with the M8, they used a lighter single cam design with a silent chain and tensioner, and they also, the covers on the M8, they were designed to dampen noise as well. And as far as the driveline components go, they improved those to basically mesh better to reduce overall mechanical noise, and also basically give the riders a more improved positive feel. But I guess all these improvements allowed for basically a marginally louder exhaust if you're running the stock pipes, and supposedly they've improved the Screamin' Eagle exhaust to be just somewhat a little bit deeper bass sound. So while all this noise reduction and all these great improvements may not mean a whole lot to us that ride Harley-Davidsons, because most of us generally the first thing we do is get rid of the stock exhaust in favor of an aftermarket set of slip-ons or even a full exhaust, and also we pretty much change everything about our motorcycles in general. But I really hope today's video kind of gave you some insight, maybe answered that question as to why Harley-Davidson would dump a proven, reliable, gear-driven cam design in favor of a chain drive that had a lot of issues. A lot. But I also hope the video today gave you a little insight into the box that basically OEM manufacturers have to work within to satisfy the EPA. And as we all know, the EPA really does not like Harley-Davidson, because you've probably heard about the lawsuit with the street tuner, the super street tuner, I should say, the one that allowed you to modify the air-fuel ratio, and they had this big buyback, and it was a mess. So guys, that's all I have for you this week. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please be sure to drop a like, subscribe to the channel, and I hope it cleared the air as to why they would make such a crazy decision to go from gears to chains on the cam drives. But anyhow, guys, until next week, you guys stay safe on the streets, dodge those cars, and I will catch you in next week's video. Thanks for watching.